Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Cardiac surgeon Enrique was willing to risk everything to save his childhood friend Carlos, unaware that his life was hanging by a thread not only because of his illness. Nurse Federica accidentally overhears a conversation between Carlos's wife and his son. What she hears shocks her to the core. Enrique Casano was an experienced cardiac surgeon. With over 15 years of practice in the hospital and hundreds of saved lives, he was used to taking full responsibility for everything that happened on the operating table, where sometimes every second counted. It was precisely because of his quick thinking and medical wisdom that 3 years ago, the senior management appointed him head of the surgical department in a newly built medical center. Who would have thought that the once rebellious Enrique would end up leading a team of colleagues willing to follow him through fire and water? And now, before him lay the protocol for a unique heart surgery performed in 2016 at a metropolitan university. The goal, an aortic valve replacement. The key component was an autopericardium, specially treated in a solution to serve as a life-saving implant. It sounded almost like science fiction, but it was effective and could extend a patient's life by many years. The technique itself had been developed by one of the leading experts in cardiovascular medicine. The highlight of the procedure was that the patient's own pericardium became the prosthetic valve. All that remained was for the surgeons to master the necessary techniques. The creator of this method was expected to visit their department in the coming days to conduct master classes for the local surgeons. Enrique would be assisting him. Medicine knew various ways to correct aortic defects, but this one was a game changer, a highly promising approach. Enrique was never afraid of innovations, but this time, his friend's life was at stake. What a tangled web of fate! Back in school, Carlos was bullied, teased, and pushed around. But now, Senor Carlos Villaseca was a prominent figure in their city, a wealthy businessman, owner of the town's main factory, a provider for many families. He wasn't chosen as the test subject because people were willing to take risks with such a legendary figure, quite the opposite. There were many concerns, but his medical history showed this was his only chance. A mechanical valve wouldn't work for him due to individual physiological reasons. Besides, Enrique wasn't sure his friend would be diligent about taking anticoagulants post-surgery. Carlos's life was too fast-paced, business, social affairs, personal matters, all moving at a relentless speed. Carlos had entered 5th grade as a thin, pale little boy. Their English and literature teacher, who was also the class supervisor, decided the best place for him was the front row, next to chubby, full-figured Margarita. She was nearly twice his size and immediately took charge of him, sending him to the cafeteria for pastries, taking his shiny red apple, and making him carry her school bag to the gym. The boy turned out to be unusually intelligent for his age, far ahead of his classmates in knowledge, something that everyone quickly noticed. If it hadn't been for the big and sturdy Enrique taking him under his wing, Carlos would have ended up writing all the tests for the entire class, both versions included. Over time, even his deskmates' demands faded into the background. Enrique shielded his friend from everyone with his strong and reliable presence. On paper, he and Carlos could never have been friends. In today's slang, people would call it an oxymoron, a combination of completely opposite things. But fate had its own plans. By the 6th grade, the entire school knew about their inseparable duo. People called them heads and tails. Everyone knew about their little tradition. Enrique would suggest, "Carlos, let's ditch school today. There's an awesome movie playing at the theater." Carlos would reply, "No problem, Enrique, but only on one condition. We flip the coin as usual. Heads, we skip school. Tails, you do your homework with me, no slacking. And you even have to raise your hand in class to get rid of that last failing grade." Grumbling and mentally complaining, the burly Enrique would pick up his books and notebooks if the coin landed on tails. Meanwhile, the scrawny Carlos would stomp his feet in excitement, thrilled to watch an action-packed film if it landed on heads. Everything between them was always fair, absolutely equal. And now, Enrique was holding his best friend's medical file, feeling something he didn't want to admit even to himself, fear. A surgeon walking hand in hand with fear is like a pilot with clipped wings. But they would manage. They would defeat Carlos's illness. Together, strengthened by faith, they were a force to be reckoned with. There was just one more problem to take care of, and he would discuss it with Federica tomorrow. Federica had no idea why the chief doctor had summoned her to his office. She had no sins on her record, and everything at work was running smoothly. She rarely saw Enrique, only during department-wide meetings or when they happened to cross paths in the hallway. She wasn't one of the surgical nurses and only occasionally entered the operating room. Her job was primarily post-operative care. And she was excellent at it, indispensable, even as if she knew how to breathe new energy and joy into her patients. After her injections and IVs, people noticeably felt better. Her fellow nurses would joke, "Federica probably spat into the syringe. Now Grandpa will be up and walking in no time." She had plenty of admirers among the recovering patients and even among those awaiting surgery. There was something warm and trustworthy about this young woman that made people want to open up to her. Federica, however, never thought much about these qualities of hers. She was raising her 10-year-old son Emilio alone. His father had abandoned them when she was still pregnant. Back then, she was just a beginner in the medical field. Fresh out of nursing school, she had looked at surgeons like they were gods, obediently following their every command. You could say she practically worshipped them, hanging on to their every word, memorizing every order, constantly worrying about not making a mistake in the prescriptions. One of the resident doctors had quickly noticed her quiet obedience. During their shared night shifts, he slowly turned everything into a romance, bringing her sweets from grateful patients, offering her sweet liqueur or champagne when the department wasn't too busy. Federica refused his advances, only taking a small sip from the glass to avoid offending him, then tried to disappear. But the young future doctor was persistent and determined to win her over. Federica had been a very pretty girl and remained an attractive woman even now. However, after that cocky resident had had his fun and ultimately abandoned her, she made an irrevocable decision: she would never trust another man again. A few times, she had started romances with former patients, but those affairs had always been fleeting, unserious, empty. Once the hospital days were behind them, their interest in the charming nurse cooled. Worse yet, she would later find out that many of these suitors had girlfriends, lovers, or even wives before their surgeries, women who had barely paid them any attention while they were in the hospital. To these men, Federica had seemed like a kind of magical savior, but once their lives returned to normal, that illusion faded. And so, things always went back to the way they were. Smoothing down her uniform and adjusting her hair under her nurse's cap, Federica knocked on the door of the chief doctor's office. When a firm come-in rang out, she hesitantly stepped forward and stopped near the long office table, cluttered with stacks of files and papers. Enrique lifted his sharp, intelligent eyes to her, gestured for her to sit, and then, without preamble, dropped a bombshell. "Federica, I have a delicate request, an important mission, actually. I need you to play the role of fiancée for a very wealthy man, our patient, Carlos Villasica." Federica thought she had misheard. She was supposed to pretend to be Carlos's fiancée? That was insane. She had not expected such a bizarre proposition from Enrique. He had to be joking. Reading the confusion on her face, Enrique immediately began listing the reasons for his request. "Your efforts, Federica, will be well rewarded with a generous bonus. This is not a joke. It's something that needs to be done, to restore fairness, to set right the balance between good and evil. You'll be helping me. Carlos is currently in a medically induced coma, and he will remain so until his surgery. I will personally introduce you to his family as his fiancée. You won't have to do much, just come in looking concerned and ask me about the health of the man you love. None of his relatives will know that you work here as a nurse." Federica was still in shock, but she finally collected herself enough to ask for time to think it over. Enrique exhaled in frustration and said grimly, "Time is exactly what we don't have for this little performance. You're on a 24-hour shift today, right? By tonight, the hospital will be quiet. I'd like you to sit by Carlos's bedside, get used to the surroundings, familiarize yourself with the setting. Federica didn't know what to say or what choice to make. But one thing was certain. I trust you, Enrique. I respect you as a professional. I haven't made my decision yet, but I do know this: I won't take any money for this favor. If you're asking me to do this, you must have a good reason. I'll give you my answer tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I'll spend some time near Carlos and, during my break, I'll read about him online. A fiancé should know the details that the media have reported, the highlights of this legendary man's life. Federica flew out of the chief doctor's office like a gust of wind. She needed time to process everything, to make sense of this bizarre situation. What was Enrique's real plan? The rich had their troubles too. Could Carlos be in some kind of danger, in need of saving? She would find out. One way or another. Federica had always been an excellent student in school and at medical college. She had even planned to attend medical university after gaining a few years of practical experience at the hospital, just to make sure her choice was the right one. But the birth of Emilio and the tough life of a single mother had thrown her plans off track. Still, her favorite saying was, "Don't believe, don't fear, don't ask." Federica hadn't been lazy about finding the origins of this famous saying, and she was surprised to learn that it actually had a continuation. Don't wait, don't trust, and don't hope. She didn't like the second part of the saying, the part that people used in contexts that suited them. Deep down, Federica still wanted to hope and believe that there was more to her future. After all, at 32, life was far from over. She was sure that there would be a real celebration in their small family with Emilio. Especially since they had their own big secret. It seemed like a miracle to Federica. Her son could compose music without knowing much about musical notation. And this had been discovered completely by accident. 3 years ago, Emilio had been invited to a classmate's birthday party, and his mother, a music teacher, had invited Federica to come along. At the party, Emilio had seen a piano up close for the first time, and it was as if something clicked. He had been entranced by the black and white keys and would press them whenever he could. He couldn't eat or drink at the birthday table, which astonished the hostess. He had forgotten all about the pastries, lemonade, and candy. All that mattered was the music, the sounds. After the party, the mother of the birthday boy had pulled Federica aside. "Don't you think your son has a remarkable interest in music, in the instrument from which it can be drawn? Would you consider sending him to our school?" But the cost of lessons at the elite music academy was beyond Federica's means. The birthday boy's mother had tutored Emilio a couple of times, purely out of enthusiasm, but like everyone else, she had to live on something. She couldn't become Emilio's permanent teacher. But Emilio had practically become obsessed with the sounds. He was always humming unfamiliar tunes and complaining that music was following him even in his dreams. Determined, Federica made it her goal to buy Emilio a piano for their home. But the necessary amount of money hadn't been saved yet. Emilio only came alive at school when they had singing lessons. During breaks, he would sneak up to the instrument, trying to play the notes that haunted him in his dreams. Federica scrolled through the contacts on her phone and pressed the call button. Emilio's bright, melodic voice answered almost immediately, cheerfully chattering. "Mommy, I'm fine. I ate everything that was wrapped in the towel, the porridge and sausages. It was still warm. I'm doing my homework, almost done. Don't worry, Maria came over twice to check on me. She said she'll come again before bed to wish me good night. I promise I won't sit in front of the TV for long. I'll go to sleep on time. And tomorrow, you'll be here in the morning. It's Saturday, so you can rest and then we can go to the movies in the evening. I love you." Federica smiled happily, as though she had drunk from a spring of refreshing water. A little bit of the ice of loneliness melted in her heart. And she and Emilio didn't really need anyone else. If it wasn't meant to be, then it wasn't meant to be. And bringing a man into the house just for health reasons wasn't for her. She wouldn't take an example from other lonely nurses. Federica's thoughts turned back to Carlos. What was going on with him that even Enrique was asking for her? The hospital gossip had been that they had been friends since childhood, that they had even gone to the same school and still kept in touch. Why had Enrique asked her to sit by Carlos today? What was his goal? Almost on autopilot, Federica administered the injections and 4 drips that had been prescribed, checked on her favorite patients, the elderly ones in the ward for senior citizens, gave out candies. Life is unfair. These old people had once fought for a peaceful future, and now they were all alone. No one even visited them. It was a sad kind of old age. She thought again about herself, imagining the sad image of when an old person would need someone to bring them a glass of water, but she didn't allow herself to get lost in those thoughts. Now was not the time for self-pity. She had to focus on carrying out the boss's instructions and staying on duty by their special patient. At just over 30, she wasn't weak. Federica carefully entered the room where Carlos lay motionless, like a dead man. The equipment on the table hummed steadily. She looked at the numbers on the monitor, noting that everything was fine, as usual. She adjusted his pillow and blanket, sat down in a chair. The room was dimly lit, only a little of the full moon peeked through the thin curtain, resembling a yellow cheese head. It had been a long, exhausting day for Federica. She wanted so badly to close her eyes and forget everything, but then she heard a rustling sound. There were 2 rooms in the luxury suite, the main room with the patient's bed and a secondary one for relatives who wanted to care for their loved ones around the clock. Federica thought she was alone in the spacious, quiet room, but it turned out she wasn't. From the second room came indistinct voices, a murmur, some rustling. In a moment, Federica quickly moved behind a screen, just in time to overhear a conversation that was not meant for anyone else's ears. There were 2 people talking, a man and a woman. Upon hearing what they were saying, Federica froze. He lies there like a statue. When is this all going to end? I'm tired of waiting. Just a little longer, my dear, I've checked. The upcoming surgery gives your husband, and my father, almost no guarantees. Our plan will work. You didn't put up with him for nothing. You've come up with such a great idea, darling, to hide out here, in the next room, knowing that Carlos is helpless, that he won't be around for long, and enjoying it. I never thought I could be so heartless. But you know what? I already know what I'll wear to his funeral. The widow of such a rich and famous gentleman will be in a small, elegant black dress, with a strand of dark pearls around her neck, and no other jewelry. Federica, hidden behind the screen, was stunned by such cynicism. She couldn't understand how this could happen. This young man was most likely Carlos's son, and the older woman was his stepmother, and, in addition, his lover. How intricately the fates of these wealthy people were intertwined. Was there nothing sacred for them? It was disgusting and repulsive to live in the house of a relative and behave this way behind his back. Now she understood why Enrique had asked her to play the role of a bride and groom, to teach these angry relatives of her friend a lesson. He was right. Such despicable people should be put in their place firmly and uncompromisingly. Meanwhile, the couple continued their conversation quietly. You should talk less, my dear. The doctor said it's possible that Carlos can hear everything, but can't respond. He's lucky. What if he survives and gets his revenge later? I've already thought about that, darling. We'll say he was in a coma and everything he heard was just a hallucination from his delirium. That we love him, the rest is just his brain's fantasy. But then I'll have to live with him again, smile at him. I can't bear to do it again, darling. Relax, baby. I love you so much. We'll come up with something else. With his heart problem, he won't be calling you into the bedroom anytime soon. We still don't even know if we'll be able to play the great lover. Didn't you say, despite your dislike, that he's really good at it? I was jealous. Is that how you teased me, you beast? Federica shuddered again. They were simply unbearable, with no shame or conscience. A loved one was hanging between life and death, and they were having this conversation. Heaven forbid Carlos hears any of it. What pain, what a horrible betrayal, and that's putting it mildly. She would have to talk to Enrique about how Carlos's family was structured. Federica now knew what she had to do. She would help the poor patient take revenge on the traitors. Evil had to be punished. But right now, she had to be extremely careful so that Carlos's wife and son didn't see her in there. As soon as both of them returned to the second room, Federica quietly slipped out of the suite. Now she understood why Enrique had sent her to the patient's bedside. He wanted her to witness everything happening around the sick man with her own eyes. Enrique didn't know the full history of his friend's family. They hadn't talked about women in detail. The choice of a partner for a friend was considered indisputable. The chronology of events in Carlos's life had been carefully laid out on websites that published his biography. His first wife was a university classmate. It was an early, rushed marriage due to an unplanned pregnancy. Back then, Carlos had jokingly told his friend Enrique, "Even the flip of a coin didn't decide this. What if she's not the love of your life, Carlos?" Carlos had responded sharply, "She's pregnant, Enrique. I've had enough of growing up without a father. My mother raised me on her own. No matter what happens, the child will have a father. It's all right, one can become a father at 18. We'll manage." The further development of events was ambiguous. At first, Juan's parents, Carlos and Chiara, both freshmen, decided to leave their son in the care of his grandmothers so they could focus on passing their summer exams. This situation remained unchanged throughout all 4 years of their studies. Juan alternated between staying with one grandmother and then the other. He grew into a charming boy, almost like a picture-perfect child. He was so adorable that he could have been in an advertisement. He had a clever and affectionate nature, like a little fox. He knew how to win over all his relatives and get his way. While Carlos was studying and later perfecting his strategies in business management, Chiara, who was free from the responsibilities of motherhood, didn't waste any time. Without much hesitation, she fell in love, passionately, as it turned out. She dropped out of university just before her diploma defense. Along the way, she informed Carlos that their marriage had been a mistake, the result of hormones and emotions. She had now truly met the love of her life. So, she said, he should forgive her. Between them, everything was over. Moreover, she didn't mind if Juan stayed with his father. She was pregnant by her lover and was going to have another child. Upon hearing this news, Carlos tried to evaluate the situation rationally. To his surprise, he realized that his own passionate feelings for Chiara had cooled off a long time ago. He had been living with her out of inertia. She was his wife, the mother of his child, a classmate, and a companion through both studies and life. If he had to sum it up in one word, habit, and there was no love left at all. And had there ever been any real love between them? To be fair, it must be said that Carlos hadn't turned out to be an ideal father either. After separating from his wife, he focused all his energy on work. He started with a small supermarket, which needed a deputy director for development. The company was family-owned. The head of the business had passed away a couple of years ago, and his wife, who had no experience in trade and was far removed from her late husband's concerns, was struggling. She handed over their business to Carlos with almost enthusiastic approval as soon as she saw that things were improving under his leadership. The widow still had a solid capital base, but she was completely incapable of managing it, and her attempts at expansion immediately led to losses. Now Carlos wasn't just working at the company, he was living it. Juan, meanwhile, was entirely under his mother's care and was growing up quite happy with his life. His grandmother spoiled him in everything. Carlos contributed money for his education and entertainment. A truly handsome young man, Juan had learned early on how to use the attention of girls and later, women. Always stylishly dressed, intellectually developed, and sociable, he was the heart and soul of any company, one that people wanted to follow and submit to. As for Juan's taste in women, he preferred older ones, those who didn't require long courtships and understood exactly why and where they were being invited. He shamelessly used his charm to get good grades in school without much studying. His teacher grandmother had prepared him well, giving him a solid foundation of knowledge. The rest he learned from textbooks. He was sharp-witted and never complained about academic difficulties. The female professors didn't dare lower his grades for mistakes in his answers. Juan was very attractive and outgoing, which drew the attention of professors at university. His entire student group was eager to help him with his studies. Carlos didn't want to use strict methods of discipline, as he didn't want to upset his wife, who had poured all her love into her grandson. He didn't think Juan was hopeless and hoped that over time, his son would grow up and outgrow his arrogance and immaturity. He didn't view his son's behavior as something bad. Juan was just having fun, changing women like fashionable gloves. Carlos thought that it would pass with age. Sometime later, it turned out that Carlos was right. It became clear that Juan wasn't as empty-headed as he had seemed. One day, Carlos had a business meeting at one of the city's restaurants. Over the past few years, he had made a rapid career. First, he became a partner and co-owner of the original supermarket. Then, with his help, the owner was able to expand one store into an entire chain of retail businesses. Eventually, Carlos bought the whole enterprise from the aging woman. She was more than happy to receive a tidy sum and devote the rest of her life to her grandchildren. Carlos stepped out for his meeting and told his son he would be dining at a restaurant. He was quite surprised when he saw his son at a table in the back of the restaurant. What caught his attention was not so much the choice of restaurant, but the companion sitting with Juan. She was very different from his usual girlfriends. After finishing the meeting, Carlos walked over to his son's table. This woman wouldn't leave his mind. There was something about her, both alluring and audacious, yet also warm-hearted and down-to-earth. The stranger smiled at him, introduced herself while Juan was still busy studying the menu and talking to the waiter. "Good afternoon, my name is Adelina. We work together with your son. He introduced me to you from afar. Right now, we're working on a very serious project. We won the tender, and we just stopped here to grab a bite. Your heir has shown himself in the best possible light. If it weren't for his vibrant, brilliant presentation, we wouldn't have gotten this order, not for all the tea in China." Adelina laughed brightly, and her charm immediately won Carlos over. He found himself wanting to meet her again. As if sensing his mood, Juan glanced at his watch and suddenly remembered. "Adelina, I have to leave right now. Please don't be upset. I've already ordered desserts and coffee to my liking, but I really need to go." Carlos hadn't even had time to react before his son disappeared out the door, leaving him alone with Adelina at the table. Unexpectedly, he decided to order a coffee. He didn't want to leave the delightful company. The conversation was light and pleasant, and Adelina turned out to be an interesting conversationalist who constantly praised Carlos's son. From that point on, they started meeting, and before long, they got officially married. Carlos was very happy. He had met the woman of his dreams, someone completely different from his first wife, Chiara. He introduced his wife to Enrique not long after, during a picnic outside the city to celebrate his birthday, with only the closest people to Carlos attending, his wife, son, mother with her friend, and Enrique's family. Enrique, the surgeon, had 3 daughters but had married late, and the girls were still very young. After spending some time with the guests, the 2 friends secluded themselves in the gazebo with a bottle of cognac. Enrique immediately asked, "What do you think, Carlos? Are you happy? I don't like the way you look. Dark circles under your eyes, pale skin, exhaustion on your face. I can tell you're still working from morning to night and never separating from Adelina. You're already over 40, you should visit the hospital for a checkup. I'll have you examined, it's time to think about your health." Men often get unpleasant surprises at this age. But Carlos paid no heed to his friend's advice. A few days later, he and Adelina flew to Sicily to celebrate the first anniversary of their marriage. July on the subtropical island was extremely hot, but the weather didn't stop the newlyweds. Carlos enjoyed the company of his young wife, taking her on tours and shopping trips, fulfilling all her desires. On the way back, during the flight, Carlos suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He remained silent, refusing to admit it, until he lost consciousness. The morning in their hometown greeted them with an ambulance. The doctors immediately confirmed there were possible issues with his heart. At Adelina's insistence, Carlos was taken straight from the airport to the hospital where Enrique worked. A quick monitoring of his condition immediately revealed that his heart was in very poor shape. It was unclear how it had even been functioning recently. Upon hearing the diagnosis, Carlos wasn't scared. He kept repeating, holding Adelina's hand. "My girl, my heart couldn't withstand the intensity of my love for you. It's nothing. Enrique will patch me up. I'll be as good as new." Carlos didn't notice the strange gleam in Adelina's eyes at that moment. There was something disdainful yet simultaneously condescending in them. She listened to him speak, thinking, "Say what you want, I'm listening, but my mind is far away." She couldn't admit to her husband that she wasn't being sincere with him, that she was deeply in love with Juan, with whom she had secretly planned to ruin Carlos, undermining his business from within. Rather, the word ruin wasn't quite accurate. They intended to gradually transfer the business into their son's hands. Adelina, an experienced expert in economic matters, was confident in their success. She and Juan hadn't anticipated that Carlos's health would decline so rapidly, but they saw it as a favorable sign. Only Carlos remained unaware. The efforts of the doctors didn't help. Carlos was diagnosed with a serious aortic valve condition, and his hospital days began. Enrique tried by every means to find an imported mechanical prosthesis for his friend, but there were constant setbacks, despite making it clear that any amount of money would be paid for the artificial pericardium. A more detailed examination revealed that Carlos's body would likely reject the prosthesis. Enrique was desperate. Then, unexpectedly, their medical center was chosen as a testing ground for a rare surgery. Enrique didn't believe in miracles, but it felt as though the heavens were helping them with Carlos's plight. The only thing left to find out was heads or tails, victory or hopeless failure. To prevent Carlos's heart from deteriorating further, they placed him into an artificial coma. Enrique, checking on him during every free moment, once caught an unbelievable sight in his room. He entered late in the evening, very quietly. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw, not far from Carlos's bed, his son Juan and wife Adelina passionately kissing each other. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice him, didn't pay attention to the narrow strip of light that fell on the floor from the corridor as he entered. He quietly slipped out of the room. His mind was in chaos. What was this? How could this be happening? Carlos was hopelessly in love with his young wife. Her betrayal would be a devastating blow to him. He had to find a way to help his friend as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Federica was serving Emilio pancakes with sour cream and thinking about Carlos. What do women really want from men? Love or their wealth? Their social status, children, or the ability to do whatever they want? Here she was, Federica, and if she allowed herself to dream, she always imagined beside her a great friend, a lover, and a father for her Emilio, a man who would accept them both for who they were. Perhaps she was strange, but she never thought about wealth. It didn't matter who would pay if they went for a ride on the carousel or to the cinema. She had grown used to being content with little, but what she truly longed for was to wake up in the morning not alone in bed, to calmly make coffee, bake pastries, cook oatmeal, and then wake up her sons, feeling their moods. "Wake up, sleepyheads, breakfast is getting cold, we have great things to do," she whispered to herself. At this moment, she didn't see expensive clothes in the wardrobe, or rows of fashionable shoes on the shelf, or jewelry in the box. Why do movies always show women's trinkets, among which there is always a box of silver and gold? She didn't need all that wealth. She was so tired of being alone, though she never admitted it to anyone. She dreamed of ironing a man's shirt and hanging it on the hanger so that he would wear it, smile, and say, "Thank you, my love, I feel so good with you, I need you so much." In her mind, Federica recreated the image of their patient, medium height, slightly slender, but well-built, a nice open face with features of kindness and sternness. She hadn't had the chance to look at him closely. There, he had seemed a little pitiful and lost. For some reason, she thought that he already knew what was going on around him, where betrayal and treason walked hand in hand. However, Federica herself had never lost consciousness or been in a coma, but she had taken care of people who had been in such a state. They all said they heard a lot, but they couldn't always pinpoint exactly what it was. Some things were perceived vaguely and distortedly. Now, Federica was hoping that after the operation, Carlos wouldn't remember or understand what had happened with him, what his loved ones had done to him. What was this? A son and a stepmother together, it was absurd. But still, there was some explanation. Adelina had ended up at the company where Juan worked by chance. Her friend had told her about the job opening. Upon meeting Juan, she had immediately fallen for him, but she hid it well. She needed to earn a living, not think about romance. To celebrate Women's Day, the company organized an unusual event, a secret giver game. On this pre-holiday day, a mysterious velvet box appeared on Adelina's desk. Inside, on a soft cushion, lay a luxurious pearl necklace, almost the same shade of blue-violet as her eyes. Adelina immediately realized it was a gift from Juan. It was so elegant and unusual. Then there was a fun party. A guy passing by their shared table with a basket of pink buds, a casual gesture from Juan, who bought a rose for every woman and a large bouquet for Adelina. They went to her place together. It was then that he confessed his crazy love. Adelina was frantically calculating how much his generosity today had cost him. The sum in her mind was staggering. But when she told Juan about it, he casually replied, "My father can afford much more than that. He doesn't keep track of my expenses. And how I want to manage his business. With you, an economist like you, Adelina, we'd move mountains." Adelina had no intention of leading Juan off course. Her plan was slowly taking shape, emerging from the depths of her mind. Getting a job with the father of her young lover. The 10-year age gap didn't bother her. She didn't look her age. Fresh as a newly picked wildflower, she took impeccable care of herself. She understood that men couldn't resist her charm, and in the past, she had chosen lovers from those who were wealthier. But with Juan, things didn't go according to plan. She didn't know who his father was and hadn't thought she'd be able to manipulate him. But soon, she had a chance to combine pleasure with profit. A month after meeting Carlos's son, they found themselves in a restaurant where Carlos had a business meeting. They were waiting for their prey. The introduction went smoothly and successfully. Carlos immediately succumbed to her charms, although Juan had doubts about such quick success. It was unpleasant for him to watch his girlfriend charm his father. But Adelina enjoyed the moment while Juan still hesitated. But will I find true stability in him? With Carlos, at least things were somewhat clear. He was already firmly on his feet and wasn't going to give up his position. They had been together for a year, and he hadn't disappointed her. The trip to Sicily only strengthened her belief that she hadn't yet made a final choice between father and son. Her husband's illness hit Adelina like a bolt from the blue. Immediately, she turned back time and rekindled fresh love for Juan. The wealthy heir wasn't the worst companion. Having overheard conversations from the doctors, she had already mentally sentenced Carlos. She didn't believe in the success of the operation. Moreover, she knew Carlos hadn't yet made any provisions in his will for his young wife. Everything told her she needed to do this, and then he joked, "But I'm not planning on dying soon, so don't count on becoming a young, rich widow. My enemies won't get that satisfaction. I'm a tough oak." He had jinxed it. After the last consultation before the surgery, Adelina changed her tune again. Now wasn't the time to clash with the potential heir. She was a smart woman. She could get rid of him later if needed. Juan could never have imagined such thoughts in Adelina's mind. He was consumed with a thirst for revenge, childhood resentments multiplying. He thought, "It's time for me to settle the score with my father for his indifference to me, for the love I never received, and the money doesn't count." Each character in this story had their own secrets, and fate had brought them all together to play a harsh drama. The first act of the play had already begun to unfold. The day of the operation had arrived. Carlos had been taken out of the artificial coma a couple of days earlier. He woke up in a somewhat silent state, not even telling his surgeon friend what was going on in his soul. Adelina did everything to show her love and concern for her husband. Juan paid attention to the patient and showed respect. Only for Federica, it wasn't yet time to appear on the scene. Enrique had given her the day off and told her to read all she could about her supposed fiancé. She was trained, considered prepared. They had already come to a common understanding on how to punish Carlos's loved ones for their lies and betrayal. Federica openly shared with the chief doctor the scene she had witnessed. The chief doctor was furious. He already knew that the stepmother and Juan were close, but the cynicism in their conversations was beyond inhuman. The surgery, which had a large audience of local surgeons, was carried out in a massive operating room. Everything happening was also shown on monitors so the entire staff could witness the magic the city professor was performing. Everything went according to plan. Federica couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen the entire time. She felt such sympathy for the man who had already been nearly put on display by his family's behavior. Fortunately, no one in the hospital had any idea what was going on behind the door of the elite suite, or else the nasty rumors would have already spread throughout the city. After the surgery, Carlos was to spend several days in intensive care. When Enrique informed Adelina and Juan that they wouldn't be allowed to see their loved one for a while, they feigned sadness for only a brief moment. They left Carlos's room under the supervision of a nurse and disappeared. Enrique thought to himself, let them come up with a new strategy, those vile people. How could Carlos have made such a mistake with this woman? Still, maybe this time I should have tossed a coin to find out, heads or tails, happiness or bitter darkness. Federica was temporarily transferred to the intensive care unit. She didn't know what Carlos and Enrique had discussed, but her patient greeted her with a sad smile and unexpected words. Let's introduce ourselves, bride. I think we should come up with a beautiful story right away. How we met, how our love was born, how everything developed. They say there's no remedy against a club except another club. We will burn one love with another, and don't look at me with such pity. I'm a big boy now, I won't shed tears or rip my hair out over the vile betrayal of my loved ones. Federica felt an incredible sense of relief. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She could work with Carlos. She was sure their performance wouldn't seem ridiculous. They would handle all the difficulties. So, she calmly suggested her solution to him. Here's what I want to say, Carlos. To avoid pretending and deceiving, we need to make friends with the truth. You and I will play real love, one that is based on warmth and sincerity. And for that, we have time and intensive care. We'll talk a lot, as much as your current weakness allows. As much as Enrique lets us be together. No one will dare say, I don't believe you. So, we need to memorize our roles so well that they roll off our tongues. Carlos couldn't help but note to himself that this woman was very likable to him. Not in the sense of wanting to start something with her in the future. Right now, his soul was filled only with ashes after Adelina. He was thinking about something completely different. Enrique had said that Federica had declined any payment for this service, even though it was clear she wasn't living luxuriously. What made her help him so selflessly? Should he think about how to turn everything into a more effective plan? He caught himself thinking that people generally interacted with him to gain some benefit for themselves. Practically, aside from Enrique, he had never had real friends who were drawn to him just because of who he was. Perhaps he would like to have a friend like Federica. He was sure she didn't base her help on any hidden agenda. Enrique had told him that she was the favorite of all the patients. People who experience pain are particularly sensitive to the souls of others and to insincerity. Federica, who had honestly earned their affection, was clearly deserving of their attachment and respect. Later, he would certainly figure out a way to thank her. Carlos's transfer from intensive care to a regular room was almost ceremonial. He was still not allowed to get up. The entire department gathered in the hallway when he was wheeled out on a stretcher. The medical staff whispered among themselves. Lucky guy. The top surgeon himself operated on him. And his chances of survival were hardly more than 20% out of 100. Our Enrique isn't a slouch either. Soon, he'll be putting these kinds of operations on stream. He assisted like a virtuoso, a pleasure to watch. Did you notice that when it's an expensive surgery or treatment, they operate on someone special, not just an ordinary person? I'd argue with you there. The surgery was experimental, and the risks were high. The only good thing is that it ended well. Carlos certainly heard the echoes of all the whispers. The attention from the audience was unsettling for him. But there was nothing to be done. His second act was about to begin. It would be good to avoid any unnecessary onlookers now. He nodded to Federica, who was standing near the door of the luxury room, and entered his new reality. What was she preparing for him? Carlos's triumphant return to the room was met with an exuberant reception from Adelina. She repeatedly adjusted his blanket, fluffed his pillow, and kissed him on the cheek lovingly. The room was decorated with flowers. On the table were several packages of juice, a large vase of fruit, and some sweets. On another day, Carlos would have been on cloud nine from such a warm reception, but now he was repelled by the artificial sweetness of it all. He was eagerly waiting for Federica to appear, but she seemed to be taking her time. Suddenly, doubts began to creep up on Federica. What was she doing near this luxurious suite? Should she really be participating in this foreign, repulsive scenario? As if sensing her hesitation, Enrique appeared nearby. Federica, you look amazing. Just like a bride to a man like Carlos. Right now, he's still very weak from all the hospital shocks and the complicated surgery. Believe me, when he recovers, goes through rehab, he'll be a strong warrior and a noble knight again. Carlos is a very decent man, a real fighter, and a loyal friend. Hearing these words of support, Federica made up her mind. She would fulfill her promise to help Carlos no matter what. She zoomed past the people bustling in the corridor and rushed into the room, almost tripping over her unfamiliar high heels. Everyone in the room was stunned, except Carlos. He remained calm and silent as Federica, barely stepping in, rushed to him, hugged him, and began kissing his face. My love, how could you hide from me that you were in trouble? We've talked so many times about being together, and sorrow and joy. And you decided to spare me the nerves? You sent me to Prague to relax, while you collapsed. I nearly lost my mind when instead of you, your secretary started sending me messages. Adelina rubbed her temples, subtly pinching herself on the arm. What's this all about? Juan froze in amazement. Some mysterious woman is trying to coo over his father. And what about his heavenly love for Adelina? Was it all a lie? Yet Carlos was happily extending his hand to the woman who had just entered, beaming with a joyful smile, immediately blooming with happiness. Federica, my love, I didn't want to darken your mood with all these temporary troubles. As soon as I'm able to sit up a little, I will file for divorce right away. In fact, it's a good thing you'll meet my ex-wife and son right now. It's time for him to know you exist. It's time to put everything in its place in my second marriage. After hearing his excited monologue, Adelina and Juan were stunned. Such an incident couldn't have happened in Carlos's family because both were sure that Carlos adored his wife, Adelina. He definitely didn't have and couldn't have had a mistress. This was absurd. Federica was an imposter. And Carlos was playing along with her for some reason. A joke, a prank, entertainment. After a moment, Adelina leapt out of her chair and rushed toward Federica. You must have mistaken the room. Let me show you where the exit is. Carlos Villasica, my husband, kindly leave us alone. Federica turned to her completely calmly. So, you decided that my beloved man is your property? You're mistaken. Moreover, I can confidently say that your trip with him to Sicily was my idea. Consider it a parting gift. Do you think Carlos is so stupid and blind that he didn't see your relationship with his son? And you, Juan, how could you do such a thing to your father? Pulling this off for mercantile reasons is disgusting. Carlos and Federica hadn't actually agreed in advance on who would say what. They decided to leave it to the mistress of improvisation. They thought it would look more natural and emotional this way. Carlos mentally applauded Federica. She was magnificent in her outrage. How was he to know that his imagined fiancée was not living his life but her own, putting all her loneliness and aimlessness into her role. Adelina and Juan were shocked. They hadn't expected such a turn of events. They didn't have the opportunity to discuss how to act next. So, Adelina theatrically rolled her eyes, first displaying confusion, then universal sorrow. She tried to use her feminine charms to influence her husband. "Darling, there's been some mistake. Everything this woman, who claims to be your fiancée, is saying is malicious fabrication. It's an attempt to take you away from me, to destroy our family. I've been faithful to you from the moment we met. Everything else is slander and painful fantasies of a fraud. Please tell me that you love me, not this pretender." Adelina looked at her husband to see if her words had any effect, but he was entirely absorbed in something else. Federica was once again kissing his cheeks and forehead, holding his hand, occasionally touching her lips to his palm. No one knew that her thoughts were once again on herself. "Why isn't this man mine? I'm so tired of falling asleep and waking up alone. Suddenly, my loneliness seems so bitter. Emilio is relentlessly growing up, more and more lost in the sounds of music, leaving me alone with my sad thoughts. Why did fate choose me to be a puppet in this story?" The scene seemed to drag on, like in a bad play. Realizing that Carlos wasn't going to explain anything to her, let alone justify himself, Adelina began frantically throwing everything into her purse, lipstick in the mirror lying on the table, a pack of wet wipes, and a manicure set. Federica watched her closely. While waiting for her beloved man to be transferred from the ICU to a regular room, Adelina was not burning with impatience. She calmly polished her appearance again so that she wouldn't waste any time on it later. A cold, calculating woman through and through. What genuine feelings could there be here? Federica wasn't sure if Adelina's love for Juan was also insincere. A woman who was this deceitful could be expected to do anything. Juan, on his part, had an intuitive sense that any attempts to confront his father would end in failure. Carlos's face, whenever he glanced at his son, was impenetrable. The scheme he'd staged with his lover, initially so successful, had ended in complete disaster. His father would never forgive him for this betrayal. He would be removed from the will, erased from his life. Even his grandmother wouldn't help him now, and it wasn't fitting for him, a grown man, to hide behind her skirts. Where had they and Adelina gone so horribly wrong? What had given them away? Only unanswered questions remained. When Adelina and Juan disappeared from view, the door to the luxury suite closed. Carlos and Federica both sighed in relief. Almost immediately, Enrique appeared in the room. "So, friends, everything went smoothly. The traitors are defeated, they didn't deny anything." Enrique gently hugged his friend. Carlos was completely exhausted. He could barely hold on, trying to say something to Enrique, but instead, he fell into a deep, much-needed sleep. He was too tired from all the emotions and tension. Federica, with pleasure, took off her stiletto heels, adjusted her pencil skirt, and wrapped herself in a warm cashmere sweater. There it was, her winter outfit, which she wore only on special occasions. Enrique asked her to keep coming to Carlos's room dressed this way for a few more days, as if she had never left. It was necessary in case Adelina and Juan decided to visit him. Carlos wasn't fooling around. He really wanted to finalize the divorce and leave the hospital as a free man. His lawyers would take care of everything. And her involvement in this little play was over. She was glad it had been a success. Behind them were those shared moments in the ICU, when both she and Carlos openly shared their lives, or at least most of them, with each other. Behind them were moments when she fed him broth from a spoon, guarded his sleep. The bouquet of tulips that a courier had brought to the hospital, which her nurse friend smuggled under a sterile napkin into the ICU, was a thing of the past. It was strictly forbidden to bring flowers into the ICU. They carried germs and bacteria, and severely ill patients were so vulnerable. But they had those 5 minutes when Carlos, with his weak hand, handed Federica the tulips, and she held them for a moment in her suddenly sweaty hand, feeling the excitement rush through her. She had been happy during those 5 days in the ICU. She wasn't alone, she felt Carlos's warmth with all her heart. People in the city viewed celebrities like Carlos as icons of prosperity. Now she knew for sure that even wealthy fat cats had hearts that could suffer and love, only they hid them under a thick layer of outward composure, feigned indifference to what was happening. Federica felt that, in a way, she and Carlos had even become a little bit friends. At least, he never acted superior to her. He was easygoing, natural, and unpretentious. But now, that little piece of happiness had come to an end. It was time for Federica to return to her duties. One saying came to her mind, and she immediately paraphrased it. Caesar will go to Caesar, and the locksmith will go to the locksmith. After the scene with the appearance of the fiancé in the room, Adelina and Juan no longer appeared at the hospital. She signed the divorce papers without a word, and he quit his job and disappeared without a trace. He only kept in touch with his grandmother, who told her that he had gone to the mountains to prepare presentations for some construction company. He didn't ask a single word about his father, as if he had never existed. Who knows, maybe parents really shouldn't place love for their children and their provision on the same level, just trying to buy them off. Carlos pondered this for a long time but never came to a clear conclusion. Could he be blamed for Juan becoming a traitor? Federica was once again being courted by the grateful patient. He was dropping hints that something might develop between them in the future. She neither said yes nor no. There was no need for anyone to know that her heart was hopelessly occupied. Carlos had taken residence there, but it seemed he couldn't care less about her. When he was discharged, he came by to say goodbye, leaving behind an enduring sadness and the scent of expensive perfume in the nurse's room. Soon after the divorce, Adelina was seen in the company of a wealthy man. There wasn't a trace of sorrow on her face. Even the pearl necklace she loved so much still adorned her graceful neck. This woman was calm and serene. If she couldn't win over one man, she would conquer another. Was that so terrible? She hadn't spent much time with Carlos's father and son. Luckily, it all ended without serious consequences, damage, or emotional loss. Her colleagues were still very surprised. Federica, there's something we don't know. What could possibly connect you to him? Where are you, and where is he? Stars like that don't come down from the heavens to us mere mortals. Ah, yes, you were taking care of him in the ICU on Enrique's behalf. And you were his fiancée, Federica thought to herself. But he had almost forgotten about it. There was such an episode, and it was all over. Winter had ended. Spring came with the blooming of lilacs, the singing of birds, and unfulfilled hopes for love. June arrived. Emilio finished another grade at school. And Federica kept having treacherous thoughts. Maybe she should forget about the piano? Take the stash and go spend it with her son at the sea? They had only been there once in their life. Who knew what tomorrow would bring? At least they would have bright memories. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. There was some noise on the landing. Federica ran from the kitchen, where she was making soup, to the sound. She opened the door. She was stunned. The entire landing in front of the apartments was taken up by a huge box. A man in a blue overalls handed her a receipt. Sign here, ma'am. Where should we put this piano? The client asked us to help you with the placement of the instrument. We barely got it up to the third floor, and it's so heavy. Federica was in shock. Emilio was already running from the kitchen, holding a wet carrot in his hands. Mom, is this your gift for the summer vacation? For me finishing another grade with excellent marks? She didn't know what to say to him. This was some kind of mistake. There would be only disappointment later. It would be better to tell the movers that they were at the wrong address. But her thoughts were interrupted by a voice she loved, often appearing in her boldest dreams. Federica, why are you dawdling? Move aside, let the workers bring the instrument in. Emilio, show them where your room is. We're going to do a major rearranging in there. Carlos turned to the woman, who was frozen like a statue. Federica, what's with you today? Were you cooking something in the kitchen? Meatball soup? Great, we'll sort out the piano and then have lunch. I must check if my fiancé cooks well, you know. I'm about to marry her, and I don't even know this side of her. Later, when the happy Emilio was playing the keys on his new piano, unable to believe that the miracle had happened, the two of them sat at the kitchen table talking. I fell in love with you, my dear, when you kissed my hand. I fell so deeply in love that the ground slipped from beneath my feet, and the sky suddenly fell to earth. And I fell in love with you with all my heart when you ate porridge from my hands and were embarrassed that there were grains left on your lips. Emilio peeked into the kitchen. Mom, will Carlos stay with us tonight? And in the morning, will you make us suniki? Yours are so delicious. Federica wasn't afraid of anything anymore, nothing at all. So she easily asked, will you stay? And he answered, if you don't kick me out. I sold all my business, bought us a little house by the sea, and put the rest in the bank. Enrique said that extra strain on my heart isn't advisable. I'm not perfectly healthy anymore, Federica, but I love you very much. I never imagined I could love someone so much. Federica looked carefully into his eyes. They didn't lie. He wasn't lying. She felt this very clearly. All his words were the absolute truth. So, she gently hugged him around the neck. God, how long I've been waiting for you.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.